Gladys was born into a world of hardship, the third child in a struggling family of 7. Her mother, Mrs. Oben, worked day and night as a seamstress, her fingers aching from endless sewing, while her father, Mr. Oben, lost himself in alcohol. He was a commercial rider, but what little he earned never seemed to make it home. Instead, it flowed away with the bottles he cherished so much. Their house, if you could call it that, was nothing more than a few cracked walls and a leaking roof in Tico, but it was the only shelter they knew. Mrs. Oben carried the weight of the family on her back like a sack of heavy stones. To make ends meet, she sold sachets of water on the streets, or what we will call pure water, her hope hanging on the small coins she would collect each day. But the burden was too much for one woman alone, so she sent her children, Gladys and her 2 older siblings, to the streets after school. There was no rest for Gladys, no time to be a child. "If you want to go to school, you must sell these sachets of water," her mother would say, her voice cracking under the strain of life's cruelty. Even when Gladys came home from school tired, with her small feet aching, she had to sell water. It was the only way. At school, Gladys was like a shining star, always taking first place in her class and always smiling. Her teachers marveled at her brilliance, but life wasn't kind to her even there. Her classmates laughed at her, calling her names. "Fat," they shouted. "Ugly," "poor." The words stung like the bite of 1,000 ants. She cried silently, her heart heavy with shame and sadness, but no one came to wipe away her tears. The children didn't know, and maybe they didn't care, that beneath the weight of those cruel words was a girl who just wanted to be loved, who just wanted to belong. When holidays came, instead of joy, it brought more sorrow. Gladys would be sent to her grandparents in Boya, hoping for a break, but there was no rest there either. She had to follow her grandparents to the farm, her small hands working the soil, her head carrying heavy trays of groundnuts to sell. She was trapped in a life of endless struggle, never able to escape the feeling of being less than others, of not being good enough, not pretty enough, not rich enough. The next school year came, and Gladys was in primary 6, the last class before secondary school. Her heart held into a thin thread of hope, a dream that she could continue her education. But her mother sat her down one evening and spoke words that shattered her small heart into pieces. "My child, I don't know if you'll be able to go to secondary school," she said, her voice heavy with sadness. "I don't have the money. There are your other 6 siblings and we can barely survive. Your 2 older brothers have already dropped out of school." Gladys felt the ground beneath her fall away. How could she leave school when it was the only place she felt alive? Even with all the bullying, she loved to learn. She loved the feeling of victory when her name was called as the best in class. But now, all that seemed to be slipping away from her like sand in the wind. Yet in the darkness, a light came into her life. Evelyn, a new girl in her class, became her friend. Unlike the others, Evelyn saw the goodness in Gladys, and they quickly became like sisters. One day, Evelyn found Gladys crying during sports. Thinking that bullies had been at it again, Evelyn rushed to her side, ready to defend her friend. But when she asked why Gladys was crying, what she heard made her heart ache. "My mommy says I might drop out of school because we don't have money," Gladys said. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Evelyn hugged her tightly as if she could somehow protect Gladys from the harsh world. "Don't worry," Evelyn said, her voice full of determination. "During the holidays, I'll come with you to sell water. We will raise the money together. You won't leave school." Gladys couldn't believe the kindness she had just received. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to stand with her, not just in words, but in action. She felt a flicker of hope light up inside her. But life had other plans for Gladys. One day, a wealthy couple, Mr. and Mrs. Alfred, visited Tico with plans on staying for a while. They had 2 older boy children of age 15 and 17. Their names were Patrick and Raymond. Patrick was 15 and Raymond was 17 years old. They would go swimming together, golfing, and even having lunch as a family out of the house. Mr. Alfred has always wanted a daughter, but his wife was unable to bear more children. He had taken note of this chubby little girl who was always hawking sachets of water on the road every day. He told his wife about her and would often later call his wife to come and see Gladys as she passed by. They decided to get to know her personally, so they often pretended to buy water from her. They would buy the entire sack of water and give her some change. Gladys would return home so happy. Mrs. Oben was so happy about the sales Gladys was making. One day, as Gladys was passing by making sales, Mr. Alfred called out to her, "Gladys, my dear, please come over." Gladys went without hesitation and smiling as always. "Yes, Mr. Oben," she answered. "How are you?" he asked. "I am fine, thank you, sir," Gladys replied. "I always see you hawking water on the streets. Don't you have assignments to do after school? Where are your parents? What do they do?" Mr. Alfred questioned. "I am in primary 6 and I go to school, but my mommy said I would drop out of school because she does not have money. She is a seamstress and my dad is a taxi man. He is never at home and he always comes back drunk, so my mother takes care of me and my siblings," Gladys responded. Mrs. Alfred was shocked and dismayed. Once again, they bought all she had and gave her extra and promised to come home and visit her parents. Thanks for listening this far. If you enjoy the story, please click the like button, leave your comments, click on the share button, and share with your contacts. Also, please subscribe and turn on your post notification for further videos. Thank you. Now, back to the story. On the day of the visit, Mr. and Mrs. Oben were present. "You are welcome to our home," Mrs. Oben welcomed them. "This is my husband, Mr. Oben, and the rest of our children. What may we offer you?" Mrs. Oben asked. "Nothing, madam, thank you. We ate before coming here," replied Mrs. Alfred. "We came here to discuss about your daughter, Gladys. We understand that she risks dropping out of school because of financial constraints. If it is okay by you, we would love to sponsor her education, have her move in with us in our mansion in Yaoundé, and become a part of our family. Of course, you have the right to visit anytime, and if you desire, Gladys will be coming for holidays from time to time," said Mr. Alfred. Mr. Oben, in all his greed, asked, "Would you be sending us feeding money too for the rest of the family? If you do so, you can have her all to yourself, oh. I don't really care." Mrs. Oben was so angry and asked the Alfreds to discard what the husband had said and that she consents to Gladys coming to live with them after her primary education as discussed. They exchanged contacts and the meeting ended. Mr. and Mrs. Alfred were so happy and they formally introduced Gladys to their sons and told them what was agreed. Gladys moved into the Alfred's mansion like a bird freed from a cage. It was like a dream. She had her own room, her own clothes were washed by maids, and she was surrounded by things she had never imagined. She promised herself she would never go back to her old life. But soon, that dream turned into a nightmare. When Gladys was 13 years old, Raymond, now 21, walked into her room and made advances at her. Gladys was shocked. She could not believe what was happening. Raymond threatened her that if she ever spoke to anyone about it, he would ensure she returns to her poor life and would kill her. Gladys was so scared to die and more scared to return to a life of poverty. She begged Raymond that she had never done what he is asking of her, but he did not listen. He made his way with her, and this kept going on for some time. Mr. Alfred soon noticed that Gladys's grades in school dropped and she was no longer as happy as she used to be. So he called her and asked her some questions, but Gladys was so afraid to talk. Mr. Alfred involved his wife, who used her motherly skills and asked direct questions with love to Gladys. "Do you not want to stay here anymore? Is there anything Daddy and I do that you do not like? Are the mates not friendly? Do you want us to change your school?" Gladys started crying and said, "No, Mommy, you are my parents. I love you and want to continue staying here. Please do not send me away. I also love my school and I have made some friends. Please, Mommy." Mrs. Alfred even more confused, asked her another question. "Don't you like staying with Patrick and Raymond?" It was at that time Gladys began to shiver as her eyes suddenly looked to the floor and she kept quiet. Mrs. Alfred repeated herself and Gladys kept quiet. At this time, the boys had gone out, so they were not a part of the conversation. "Mommy, Raymond comes to my room quite often, threatens me and forces himself on me." Gladys gave a loud cry. "I have been afraid to talk because I do not want to die and I do not want to go back to Tico." Gladys cried even louder. Mrs. Alfred's heart became so shattered. "Which Raymond?" she asked. "My own son Raymond? Impossible." Mrs. Alfred called out to her husband to be privy to Gladys's confessions. When Mr. Alfred heard of it, he began to cry, thinking how he had failed as a father. How could he not be aware of the sudden changes going on in the lives of his children? Mr. Alfred could not take the indiscipline, betrayal, and heartache. So he called the police on Raymond, and immediately Raymond returned home, he was arrested and taken into custody. Gladys, on the other hand, was sent to therapy and she healed slowly. But she never opened up to Mrs. Oben, her biological mother, about what had happened, as her loyalty was with the Alfreds now. She had started hating her mother, as all her new friends were wealthy and had parents who visited them in school with plenty goodies, but her mother would visit in rags and bring only menial stuff. By the time she entered university, Gladys had completely cut ties with her biological parents. Her mother, dressed in simple rags, would come to visit, but Gladys would turn her away, ashamed of her. When Mrs. Oben came to see her in the university hostel, Gladys, embarrassed in front of her friends, lied and said Mrs. Oben was a maid. The wound she inflicted on her mother was so deep, but Gladys had grown blind to the pain she caused. Then, one day, tragedy struck. Mr. and Mrs. Alfred died in a car accident, leaving everything to Patrick, their son. Raymond was disowned, and Gladys, thinking she would inherit some of their wealth, was left without nothing. Patrick refused to share anything with her, reminding her that she had abandoned her real family. In the end, Gladys found herself back where she started, alone, abandoned, and poor. She had turned her back on the people who truly loved her, and now, the Alfreds gone, she had no one. The wealth she had once dreamed of was gone, and all she was left with was a painful truth that you can never forget where you come from. And so, like a bird who had flown too far from its nest, Gladys returned to poverty. But this time, there was no one left to catch her when she fell. I hope you love the story, and if you do, please leave your comments in the comment section telling me what story you would like to hear next. Please click the subscribe button, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!